All right. Hello and welcome to LinkedIn Live with Emsi Burning Glass. Today, our economists are going to give their real-time first take on today's job openings and labor turnover survey, affectionately known as JOLTS, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm Remy Verstraete, and today I'm joined by our chief economist, Bledi Taska, and senior economist, Layla O'Kane. So welcome, Bledi and Layla.
Good morning,
Thanks
Amy.
so much. Good morning.
All right, let's jump right into it. Bledi, I'd like to start with you. What are your first impressions from today's JOLTS report? What jumped out to you?
Well, the good thing is that not many things have changed. Employer demand is still, I would call it, red hot. There was a small decrease, especially when you compared to the previous months, and we did have a revision, so there was a small decrease, but not many changes in employer demand overall. Higher separation, also very little change. I think the main and surprising data point is that layoffs were decreased significantly. We're at a historical low, and that goes against the main media story, essentially, that we are seeing many layoffs. And I think that's probably a separated event, mostly maybe happening in the tech sector. But again, we are hearing more and more about that. The data is comforting on that end. We are not seeing large layoffs, or the opposite. There was actually a historical low of the layoffs. And then I would say the other thing that was kind of surprising is that we saw a difference in the stories from the previous month. We saw a decrease in demand in the services sector, and we saw an increase in the demand overall in the goods sector. So warehousing, transportation, manufacturing also an increase, which is sort of the opposite again from what we're hearing in the media, and the opposite also from what we saw the previous month. So I would say those were sort of the three main events that we see. Not many changes, a small decrease in demand, layoffs at the historical low, and a reverse in the demand between services and goods.
Okay, great, thank you. And Layla, coming from an employer's perspective, and then I'll also ask about a worker's perspective. What if you're an employer looking at this report, what are you thinking? And then you can go ahead and turn it around from an employee's perspective. What should they be thinking?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall, if you're an employer, openings are still really, really high. I know we had a revised estimate last month. They've gone down a little bit, but they're still super high. And overall separations are still really low. And so I think it's still really a tough battle out there for employers to find talent, where I think some employers might be feeling maybe a little bit more optimistic, or could feel a little bit more optimistic, is in retail and in food and accommodation. So sort of the services industry has been battling labor shortages for a long time now throughout the pandemic and kind of in this post-pandemic world. And I think we're seeing some softening there that's going to make employers feel a little bit better, like they have the talent that they need a little bit more.
Okay. Great. And Bledi, I do want to ask you, as far as the stock market versus the job market, are we seeing a disconnect there where there's starting to be separation in terms of how they're performing, or are they still kind of going together?
I think the stock market is reacting more to changes in the interest rates more than anything else. And again, it is to be seen what the effects of those will be fully in the economy. I don't think there's a huge separation. I actually do expect today's news for the layoffs to have an effect in the stock market, to have a positive effect in the stock market, and sort of make the market a bit more calm. But again, remember, there's a lot of things that are affecting the stock market. And again, the stock market is also looking many months ahead, sort of pricing out different events and how things will play out. And so I don't think there's a huge disconnect, but there are some of this news that do affect it, and I expect today to see some of that.
Right. Great. Okay. Thank you. And Layla, I'll come back to you. Where do you see demand for talent growing? Where's kind of the hottest area of demand for talent?
Yeah, for sure. So demand for talent in terms of openings has grown the most in transportation, warehousing, and utilities, and then also in non-durable and durable goods manufacturing. And so we sort of seen big increases there.
Okay, great. And any particular areas that jump out to you, Layla, in terms of areas of softening or weakening demand?
Yeah, so we kind of chatted a little bit about this, but I think this is where it becomes sort of optimistic for employers in these sectors in retail and in accommodation and food services. We're seeing openings decrease there, and then we're also seeing separations decrease there. And so that means that there's kind of softening going on in those sectors. But I think we're going to need to start paying a little bit more attention to the durable and non-durable goods side.
Okay. Great. And Bledi, putting this in context of this idea of an ongoing labor shortage, what does this report tell us about that? Does it introduce any new information as far as the labor shortage idea, or is it kind of steady as she goes?
Well, I think there's a short run and the long run point of view there. I think in the short run we do see changes happening from industry to industry. So, for example, this month, right, we saw the opposite happening in the services sector. We saw some softening, but we're seeing the opposite happening in the financial and the construction sector. Like the quit rates actually doubled in financial sector and also increased in the construction. So we are seeing some volatility on that. I would not necessarily read, again, too much into that per se. I do think that the bigger stories or the bigger picture is that labor shortages are there to stay. And I do think for at least 2022, we're going to keep seeing those labor shortages. There's a high probability we're going to keep them for the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. So I do think like the bigger story or the bigger picture is that labor shortages are there to stay, but we'll see a month-to-month volatility in the different sectors. I do think then the other important question is if we're going to see the sort of effect of the quit rates that mostly happened in the sort of the low-paying jobs actually transmitting to the high-paying jobs. And we are seeing some indication of that with the financial sector, but I would like to see more data points of that. I think that's the biggest question mark. Are we going to see quit rates also expanding into high pay or what traditionally called white collar jobs? And that is to be seen. I think that there will be some of that, and that is going to make labor shortage even more severe also in other sectors.
Okay. And in terms of the wages themselves, do you expect to see continued upward pressure on wages? And how would that break out between sort of the already high-paying jobs and those kind of sub $20 an hour jobs?
I mean, for sure, first of all, as long as we see inflation rates, inflation rate being up, we're going to see also some demand from employees actually for raises. Just for that reason, the quits. Also, we've seen that the people that are changing jobs are actually having larger wage growth. So all of those will have an effect on wages going up. Now, that being said, wages cannot go up forever. Again, the economists do speak about this, wage prices spiral, and hopefully we'll not get into that, but I do believe that we'll get out of that at some point. I don't know if the solution to that is actually because demand is going to drop so much or because their employers are actually going to be more creative. But I do think it's going to be a combination of both. I do think we're going to see a decrease in demand, maybe potentially starting towards the end of 22, maybe starting 23. But also we're seeing employers, exploring other alternatives. I think there was in the news in the past couple of days that we're seeing more and more. I think there was like the order for robots has increased, for example, significantly. And that is a way for employers to react to these wage increases. So we're going to see more and more alternatives to essentially to labor shortages, with employers being more creative, either through automation or potentially even outsourcing or potentially hires outside of the country. And so I think there's going to be a combination of those that are going to lead to a sort of more decrease in all of this wage growth that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do either of you, Layla, we can start with you, but I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on construction job openings, which just hit an all-time high, and what that says about the housing market in light of higher interest rates. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that the housing market has been cooling off a little bit with these higher interest rates. We've been seeing that it's not as crazy as it was maybe a year ago in terms of demand. But with construction, I think, it's possible that will increase some of that inventory and also continue that cool off. It's also possible that this is sort of just fulfilling some of the really intense demand that happened over the last year or two for renovation and that type of construction, and people really investing more in the homes that they already own. So it could go a couple of different ways, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, for construction, I would not read too much. I would like to see the data, how they were from last year, because remember, construction is also very seasonal. So a lot of the construction activity does start, after March or April, and it's just by definition, you need good weather to at least work on some of these things.
Right.
But at the same time, we are hearing a lot of these effects, from demand side. But remember, from the supply side, we are short in houses, and as many houses that we build, we're still not going to get even just like the regular demand that exists. And so, like, I think we're like around, we need around 2 million houses per year approximately, and we're building probably at least 1.5 or something like that. So even just a pent-up demand, it's still there, and we're going to have a lot of issues with catching up.
Great. And going forward, Bledi, to follow up, if we do see an economic slowdown, does this report indicate that layoffs won't be a result of the slowdown? If you break out your crystal ball.
Well, my non-crystal ball said if we do see an economic slowdown, we will see layoffs. And I think the fact that we're not seeing layoffs is an indication that we're not there. I think at least at this moment, all of the discussions about a recession are a bit overblown in some ways or overreacting, at least for now. I think in 22, the economic conditions are fairly good. We might be seeing a slowdown, but not necessarily a recession. So that being said, in some of the sectors, especially some of the ones that were over leveraged, like the tech sector, a lot of the startups, we're going to see even more layoffs. So that will happen. I just don't expect that to happen in all the economy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your time. Layla, I do want to wrap up with you. Any last thoughts or just key takeaways for folks watching this morning?
I mean, I think key takeaways are that we still have really high openings. Separations overall remained about the same, but layoffs, again, we're at a series low. And I think we're seeing some softening going on in services. So in retail, in food and accommodation, those are sort of my three main points. I think the other thing to note is, as Bledi kind of mentioned, the tech sector has been dominating the news in terms of fears of layoffs and actual layoffs, and we're not really seeing that overall in the economy. And so it seems like that is kind of a smaller niche of the economy that's really focusing on layoffs or having layoffs right now. I think the other thing to note is that for workers, this kind of just means that there's still a ton of openings and a ton of opportunity potentially for the great reshuffling to continue. So we're not really seeing a slowdown there. And we'll know more, these numbers are from April. So we'll know more on Friday with employment situation, also what has been going on in May.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much, Bledi and Layla, and everyone who's been watching. This has been our live real-time reaction to the JOLTS report. I'm Remy Verstraete, Senior Writer and Strategist here at Emsi Burning Glass. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.